Okay. Sahil, what is today's spectacle? What have we witnessed today?
It is the perfect Rorschach test of this entire Russia investigation. If you came in thinking that Peter Strzok is the villain, that he was up to no good, there's plenty of material there that you can use to validate your view. If you have a different view, if you heard the questions about him on the other side, which is that the fact that the FBI disclosed and discussed this investigation into Hillary Clinton in ways that demonstrably hurt her while concealing the investigation into Donald Trump and his campaign and potential potential collusion coordination with Russia in ways that would have hurt him if that was disclosed. If this was a conspiracy by the FBI, it was a pretty lousy one.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think it's important to say you just ran all this noble Strzok,
Sure.
talking about. This is a guy who was escorted from the FBI premises a month ago. This is a guy who the Inspector General of the Justice Department said had exposed bias in his own personal on emails and texts using a government phone. He says he doesn't have bias. The IG of the Inspector General appointed by Obama, or was Inspector General during the Obama years as well as the Trump years, said he could not say that bias did not affect Peter Strzok's behavior here, and Robert Mueller fired Strzok from his investigation.
In that same IG report, he also said, well, what they can't say about, they know that his bias didn't impact the larger investigation.
But Mueller had to have him removed from the investigation a month in when he found out about these texts between him and his former mistress,
which he did before they went public.
Well before, 6 months before they went public.
Which is an important, a very important fact.
It is, except that my point is that Strzok was a major figure in the Trump and Hillary investigations from the summer of 2015 through the Mueller appointment in 2017. And Mueller said, oh, this is bad news, you got to get out of here. So before we celebrate his wonderful testimony about how no one, and he has no bias and no one has any bias, the facts of his own conduct need to be known.
Right. Well, no, actually, no, that is a question I have. Why is this public today? The investigation, why is this in front of TV cameras? If we're in the middle of an investigation, why ask him questions he can't answer?
Because this is what happens when the conservative media infrastructure bangs a certain drum and a certain message, and then the mainstream media often is forced to cover that controversy that the right-wing media has been focused on for many, many, many months. This hearing today was not for CNN. It wasn't for us here at MSNBC. It was specifically for the audience at Fox News. They believe that Peter Strzok was completely biased and this investigation is a witch hunt. And so what Republicans did today was reiterate that message and grill him so that they can show it tonight on television, and the audience that already is preconditioned to believe that he is corrupt and that this investigation is corrupt, they're going to be fed that specific message. And this was for them.
And the real issue of bias there, to John's point, which if I can pick up on that, it can neither be proven nor refuted definitively. The IG report hedged on this question, so they cannot rule it out, but they're not accusing him of this either. And this is where you get to a he said, she said, where people can make up their own minds, people can see into it whatever they want. While the House is investigating and bringing Peter Strzok for this long inquisition, the people they're not bringing in, Manafort and Gates, Don Jr., Jared Kushner. That is the investigation that is undergoing. They're investigating the investigators. They prefer that.
John, this is the part of this that I'm just sort of, there's no part of holding this hearing in the midst of this that feels responsible. Yeah. This feels like an irresponsible action by Trey Gowdy.
Okay, so I think you cannot look at the release of the IG report on the Hillary Clinton investigation that mentions all of this and say that the FBI, and not just about Trump, but about Hillary Clinton. This report was savage about James Comey, the head of the FBI, and his conduct in the Hillary Clinton investigation, and whether or not that had a material role in changing the results of the election. So what this goes to.
So why isn't James Comey up here today?
Well, he should be.
Yeah, I mean, right?
He has, but he has been, hasn't he?
If this is no, my point is, if it's about that, then it's the wrong person.
The new news in the IG report was the discovery of these texts that mysteriously never made it to Congress. Congress had subpoenaed and had gotten all this information on what was going on in the mid-year exam, and which was the Hillary term, and the Operation, Grey Goose, I can't remember what the hell it was called, the Trump organization. And for some reason, some of these texts from Strzok did not make it from Justice to Congress. And when the IG report came out, they had this thing where Strzok said to his girlfriend will stop it. Now, okay, you want to say that that's innocent?
Right.
That's fine. You can't presume that it's innocent.
Let me play one of the exchanges.
It sounds weird. He's the number 3. He was in the Hillary Clinton room.
To his
he was
point
running.
that he did not go and do anything that would align with what he was saying.
That's the important point on his part. That is the exculpatory part of his story, and the fact that the Trump investigation remained silent before the election, and Hillary was obviously partially undone by the revelation of the investigation into her.
I want to go back.
So that's his defense, and it's a good one. I'm not saying it's not.
I think that there is an agreed upon larger good government aspect that could be conducted here. But let me play you this. Today was a circus.
Yeah.
Today has been a circus.
Awful.
It hasn't been a good government moment. Take a listen.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
If it's so frustrating, answer the question.
If you'll allow him to, I'm sure he will.
He has never answered the question who
Stop
Bjorn and Simpson
interrupting
are.
him.
I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
Credibility of a witness
Shame
is
on you,
always
Mr.
an issue.
Mr. Chairman, please,
Have you know, Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
Look, this committee is always filled, like I always said, with the people that leadership doesn't want to see in front of donors. I hate to say it, whether it's on the Democratic side or the Republican side, this committee gets filled up with those folks. And it gave us that hearing, sir.
Yeah, that was an ugly moment. And I mean, I knew that comment about the medication was coming, and still it's jarring to hear it.
Jarring,
right? It's still like, wow. But look, I
the
think
American government on display.
Right. I mean, like, that is all irrelevant. All his affair, all of that is irrelevant to whether or not the alleged bias impacted his conduct in the investigation. It did not. And so I think that the hearing should have been over several hours before it was. Because we went over the same text messages over and over and over, and we get the point. He said the word impeachment. Maybe he shouldn't have done that.
It does seem like it's being done for television cameras.
One thing
that's shocked that happens.
Well, I mean, come on. It's a congressional, anytime a congressional hearing makes it to a network like MSNBC, it is not a good moment for democracy, because as Bismarck said about negotiating with, I think, France, it's like a sausage factory. You don't want to know how the sausage is made.
And the House of Representatives in America, it's like the worst parts of the sausage.
Yeah, most hearings.
Strzok's defense of his will stop this was he in his view, we was the American voter. He wasn't speaking we as the FBI. Again, people can believe whatever they want about this.
Then he said he had a backup plan. It was weird.
And then
the
there was one
texts are
Democratic
weird.
congressman who pointed out that there were many Republicans at the time who said worse things about President Trump.
But those politicians are elected. He is an official of the FBI investigating candidates, and he is also under the provisions of the Hatch Act.
And the distinction he was trying to draw was personal views on one hand and professional activity.
I believe that.
Do me a favor. What part of today was bad for Vladimir Putin?
Nothing.
None of it.
Everything happened today.
If his goal is to divide Americans from within, this was a spectacular showing of success.
And I think that was his intention in the hack in the first place. It wasn't necessarily explicitly to elect Donald Trump.
No. I think he hit the lottery on that. I think he expected to win. It was about probably damaging.
I think it was just so discord, and he's been very successful in doing that, even to this day.
And that predates Trump. That goal of Russia.
But remember, Trey Gowdy, one thing you have to say is whatever you think about Trey Gowdy, he is retiring. He's leaving the Congress. He's a very excitable and hot-tempered guy, but he's earnest. And he wasn't doing this he's not getting anything from the cameras for doing this. He's got a thing. He thinks that he's been misled. Now, Louis Gohmert, who was the guy who said the thing about the affair, he's scum. That's scum. That was a scummy, loathsome thing to do. He's a loathsome politician. It's everything you hate about politicians rolled up in one. Gowdy's a different story. I know a lot of Democrats don't like him, but
he's not liking him. I just think that absolutely he's doing it for the cameras. You don't do what he did today, or the 11 hours of grilling Hillary Clinton on Benghazi, unless you care about
I'm saying
cameras.
Right now he has retired from Congress. He is not running in 2018. He's not making a campaign commercial. He wants to go and practice law. He's done with Washington.
It's interesting, Kyle, to sort of try to moderate this way. I do get the sense that Gowdy is trying to both appease the angry Trump constituency on his committee, and at the same time try to bring others around. Well, the investigation does matter.
He's still chairman of that committee.
Yeah.
He's still a Republican in the House of Representatives. He would not be there if he didn't reflect where the conference was on some level. And it's true that in certain ways, he has tried to build some bridges, at least in the sense of accepting the intelligence community's findings without equivocation that Russia meddled in the election for the purpose of helping elect Trump. There are many others in the House. Most of his colleagues don't accept that. Devin Nunes has not accepted that. Trey Gowdy has.
Right.
In some ways, he will go there and try to build those bridges. And sometimes I think he will still be partisan.
Right. He is in that. He does seem to straddle, is it Monday Trey Gowdy, Sunday Trey Gowdy, Tuesday Trey Gowdy on that stuff.
Well, he's an excitable person.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.